in a Okay, the session on translation is being recorded. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome to the panel discussion on recent translations, sponsored by DC Area Literary Translators Network. For anyone who's not already a member of DC Alt, I would encourage you to get in touch with me by getting my email address. I'm going to put it in the chat and get on our email list. Okay, it's in the email list, or it's in the chat now. And so today we have 4 speakers, and I've decided to go in the order that follows. First, we'll start with Mojda Bahar, then we'll go to Jack Gatume, then we'll do Yirmiyahu Taub, and finally we'll hear from Indran Amirthanayagam. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Mojda Bahar, whom I'm meeting for the first time today. So it's a pleasure to meet you virtually, Mojda.
Same here, thank you.
She will be discussing her Persian translations. She is a translator of Persian poetry, particularly by women poets. She has published 3 books of translation: Song of the Ground Jay, a bilingual anthology of poetry of 52 contemporary Iranian poets; then an expanded edition of Song of the Ground Jay with 104 poets; and finally a collection of short poems called Mirror Poems Collages. So I turn the floor over to you, Mojda.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here and get to know some of the DC area's literary translator. I want to basically first situate the book. And in order to situate the book, I want to start with a very brief history of the role that women play in Persian poetry. Then I'm going to mention in a sentence or two something about the title of the book. Why is it titled as Song of the Ground Jay? And then some thoughts of the translation journey and reciting some of the poems for you. I hope to achieve all of this in the 20 minutes allotted. As you may know, Persian poetry has a very long history, and the first Persian poet, Rudaki, was in 11 centuries ago. In the 10th century was the very first Persian poet. At the same time that Rudaki was writing, there was a woman poet called Rabi'eh, but unfortunately, very few people have heard about her. Yet we know a little bit more, not that much more, about Rudaki. When you look at the history of Persian poetry, you may be familiar with names such as Omar Khayyam, that was translated by Fitzgerald. You may know of Rumi, who was translated, among others, by Coleman Barks. You may have heard of Hafez, but few people have heard about women, Persian women poets. Some of the ones you may have heard of is Furukh Farrokhzad, who has written a lot of what today we would probably call feminist poetry. Other poets known to Anglophones might be Simin Behbahani, and to a lesser extent, Jaleh Esfahani. When you look at the history of Persian poetry, you will see that there is probably about 8,000 Persian poets that are men, and only 400 that are women. In anthologies that were gathered in the 1960s and 1970s, if there were names of 250 men and their works, there might have been 3 women named. So while Persian women have been writing poetry for 11 centuries, unfortunately, we don't know of them or of their poetry as much as we would know about the Iranian men. And part of that, as you can imagine, is the social limitations that were imposed on women. patriarchy and the patriarchal system that effaced them, and we don't really talk about them as such. And the fact that in the last 40 years, the Iranian women have undergone the most restrictive time of their lives after the 1979 revolution. So this book, I hope that in this book, I captured the voice of women on the ones that were born after 1941 to today. And the reason I've chosen that timeline is because that captures the most liberal and liberated time in women's rights history in Iran, and the most restrictive time. And to kind of see through these women, these 104 women, to see and analyze, right, whether there are any changes in the topics that they cover, whether there is, and if so, what are the changes? What has amazed me on this journey of learning about these women is that most of them, in addition to being poets, are attorneys, are physicians, are rock climbers, are journalists, are activists. So a lot of them are very engaged in other aspects of social life in addition to their literary careers. And I think that's fantastic. When writing the book, so I mentioned to you, why is it that it's important to talk about Iranian women poets, not just Iranian poets in general? Sometimes I wonder, whether we should still be highlighting in 21st century women poetry versus just poetry, right? These poems are great with their own merit. They don't need to necessarily be that of a marginalized voice to be great. However, and we always ask, should their gender be included? Why not just say poets? And I think that in societies or at times when gender may be the only reason for exclusion, we actually do need to talk about gender in order to make sure that it's no longer used as a reason for exclusion. So only if for nothing else, but for the fact that anthologies had effaced women, I think it's important to have an anthology that is dedicated to women. Before my work comes a very important work of a celebrated Persian translator, Dr. Richard Davis, Dick Davis, who was at Ohio State University. And the book is called The Mirror of My Heart, and that captures Persian poetry from Rabi'eh that I mentioned in 10th century to today. So it is an amazing anthology through the ages. This anthology, as I mentioned, concentrates on women that were born after 1941. And as the cover of the book mentions 1960 to 2023, we are assuming that those born in 1941 probably started writing in their late teens or early 20s, hence the designation. So why the name? Why the name of a bird? The book is called Song of the Ground Jay. So this is the one with the 52 women poets, and this is the expanded edition about which I'm talking today with 104 women. And why would I choose the name Song of the Ground Jay? Iran is a country that's native to many plants. However, there is only 2 native birds, and one of them is the Iranian ground jay, scientifically known as Podosus paleski. And what is interesting about this bird is that it's usually in the desert region, so in the middle of Iran, and although it can fly, it sometimes runs, and it has very strong legs, which is unusual for birds, as you may know. It has very strong birds. It can run, and it has the same exact sand covering of the desert, basically in order to kind of, it's a camouflage, if you will. It's the same exact color at its environment as a way of adaptation. But when it starts flying, you will see that it's not sand colored. Actually, all the wingtips are white, black, and blue. And it's a glorious bird to just kind of see the difference between it seated in the desert and when it flies. And for me, it symbolizes women, or in this case, Persian women. They're low key. They are very well adapted to their environment, but they can distinguish themselves through flight and through song. So that's the name for that's the reason for the name of the book. I also wanted to read you a poem of a Persian poet. And unfortunately, this is one of those that's attributed to many different poets. So let's just go with, this is a Persian contemporary woman writer. And I think this sums up why I went on this journey and why I wanted to make sure that the voices of these 104 women were heard. They forbade women from dancing, singing, being in love, kissing, laughing. Women retreated into their cocoons, and because they were lonely, many became poets. And in their poems, they danced wildly, sang, loved, kissed, but they did not laugh. They only cried. I think this is very true. These women found refuge in their words. And I think as a reader and a translator, I found a refuge in their words and wanted to make sure that we talk about the wide variety of themes that they cover, the diversity among their professions and where they started, and why is it that they have committed part, if not their whole life, to poetry. And they're not a monolith. They're very different. These women live in many different parts of the world. About 30% of them live in Iran. The other 70% lives in North America, Europe, and some in Australia. And I was intentional about not limiting this geographically and basically having it capture all the voices from all the women across the ages. And they range in age, these poets, from, in their 20s to well into their 80s, 70s, and 80s. So I want to read some of the poetry with your permission to you. There is a lot to read, but what I've tried to do is to choose the shorter ones so that I can introduce you to more poets. So with that. So this poet's name is Razieh Bahrami Khoshnood. She was born in 1978 in Iran, and she is a poet and translator and has been educated in dramatic literature. My hands, since the day you left them, have become a part of the Museum of Lost Objects. The next one is Maryam Ishaqi. She is a physician, and she was born in 1969. My homeland is your embrace. Beyond the borders of your body, they speak a foreign language. And I thought this was especially adept for today's discussion with translators. I have to explain something before I read the poem to you. This poem is by Elham Gordi. She was born in 1982, and she has studied laboratory sciences and social work, and is a researcher and a poet and a translator. Kursi is similar to the Japanese kotatsu or the Spanish brasero. Basically, it's a way to keep warm in the winter. These are low tables under which there is a heat source. And depending on what country you're in, the heat source differs. And you go under it, and it's a very cozy environment, and you use it throughout winter. And Yalda is winter solstice, the longest night of the year. So with that, the Kursi was full of memories of Yalda, the night it would be sentenced to life in the storage room. The next poem is about poetry. and it's by Ruhangiz Karachi. She's a university professor and a women's rights. She writes about women's writing and is a literary historian and was born in 1954. If poetry did not exist to turn the boulders of my dreams into my homeland, to place pain word by word in the mouth of love, the world would be nostalgia's exile. If poetry did not exist, insanity and words and poppy fields would not become attached to me. This one is by Mahine Khadivi, born in 1954, and she's a psychologist, author, and poet. When governments collapse, rumors are fabricated. When people collapse, stories. When love collapses, only birds become sad. The butterfly sings, the moth flutters, and autumn becomes a stranger. And here is the last one. Don't call. Loneliness has called. I'm closed until further notice. As I don't want to end on a sad note, let me read you just one more. The poet is Bita Malakuti. She was born in 1973. She also studied dramatic arts and is a poet, writer, and journalist. This is for her mother. Light is a Woman is the title. I know light is a woman, like my mother's picture in the frame, pouring on the night's memory. And the world cracks, and from the bloody gap in the soil, peace, which is like your childhood hands, laughs plainly. And the woman is the dawn of the future and the noon that reaches freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great to be introduced to those poets. I'm going to ask that you reserve your questions till after everyone has presented, and you can direct your questions to Mojde and any of the other presenters at that time. Our next speaker is Jackson Gatume, and he will be discussing a piece entitled Recognize and Know Yourself. He is a professional Swahili, Kikuyu, and Sheng linguist. He is a translator, transcriber, interpreter, content creator, and a cultural advisor on the cultural characteristics of the people of Kenya, East Africa in particular, and the East African region in general, among other language and linguistic skills. Jackson is originally a native of Kenya in East Africa. He has worked with various people on language assignments, including the government of the United States. So welcome, Jack, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Keith, and good afternoon, everyone. Mine, like Keith said, is Swahili. And usually what I do is I translate this content from both Kikuyu and, well, it's people say Swahili, but the language is Kiswahili, and the people who speak the language Kiswahili are the Swahili people. That is a distinction I always try to make at every opportunity that I get. So the origin of Kiswahili is actually a Bantu people of the East African coast and the Arab traders who came down to trade in the probably 14th, 15th century. And they had to create a medium of communication when they intermarried with the local people. and they formed Kiswahili. Actually, Kiswahili is actually a combination of Arabic, those Bantu languages, and lately some English, because Kiswahili is a language that is still developing, especially as it goes international, where we have about an estimate, the last estimate was done for about 300 million speakers of Kiswahili, including in the United States, where several universities have actually a faculty of African languages, Kiswahili being major of them. I'm going to work on one motivational piece of, I don't know if it's prose or poetry, but I just write what comes to mind or what I gather in both Kiswahili, Kikuyu, or Sheng. Sheng is, let me call it, for lack of another word, is a fabrication of Kiswahili. When people are sitting in a group, and probably some, especially the young generation, does not want the older generation to hear what they are saying, they create Sheng. And Sheng is actually a medium of communication that is so complex and developing every day that they achieve their goal, that it's only between them that. But I actually am a language enthusiast, and I keep tabs and develop myself on that. Hence, my, call it, skill in that, and I like putting that out there. Kikuyu is more local in Kenya, but it's spoken by the most popular tribe in Kenya. And politically, it's a very dominant language. Economically, it's a very dominant language. And that's why, and sometimes it's required in certain sectors of the government of the United States, as much as Kiswahili is. So I'll do a piece of work called Recognize and Know Yourself. In Kiswahili, if you want, that is said as jitambue na ujijue. Jitambue is recognize, ujijue is know yourself. And here I begin. Listen, you human being, not everybody will understand you. Fish and water have been friends since the formation of the earth. However, water can live without fish, but the fish cannot live without water. They are friends who are really bound together like roots and earth. But it is water that is used to boil fish so that it can be consumed by the human being. There are some of your friends who are real enemies of your dreams. They finish you by killing your aspirations on everything you think about. Every thought that you develop, they tell you it is not possible. They even proceed to give you examples of people who have tried the same thing before you and they failed. Finally, they will laugh at you. You will be on your own at that point. Do not blame anyone saying you are not forewarned. Do not hurt inside or complain because of people who have moved out of your life. It is entirely possible that God knew their bad intentions over you, or he heard their conversations about you that you did not hear. He saw things that you did not see, and he took steps that you would not take. Do not blame anyone for their departure. Do not live lazily. Have high goals. Know what you want. Know what or who you want to be in this world. Put a picture of what or who you want to be in your head, and then live in that picture. Do not just move and live in a zigzag manner like a spiral. Do not live like you are not in the world. and like you're being looked for in heaven. If you live in that fashion, you'll be nowhere and you will have no foothold on anything or anywhere. Determination, consistency, focus, and sacrifice are the route to achievement, accomplishment, and prosperity. People cannot just start understanding you instantly and immediately without knowing you or who you are. They must have a foundation and a reason to understand you. They will understand you if you persevere. Do not blame them or yourself, even if time goes beyond your targeted time of accomplishment and ultimate achievement. That appointed day is still ahead of you. God does not have a tradition of living one who is justified. The key to failure is when you want to please everybody. Just do what you believe is right. Do just that. Respect your thought process and do not become fearful of anybody, all because of them. Believe that God is with you so he can rescue and save you. The rabbit and the rat have a similar manner of movement. They also have certain similar physical features. They both move by hopping speedily. They both eat in very fast motions. If the rabbit and the rat live longest in good conditions, it is for 15 years. This span of life for the rabbit and the rat does not concern human beings anywhere. In some instances, the rabbit or the rat will live for only 2 years, yet the human being will not know which rabbit or which rat lived for 15 or for 2 years. The tortoise, which moves at a very slow pace and has so many rest stops, can live for up to 100 years. One thing that many people desire is fast prosperity. Many people want to go to bed poor and rise the following morning rich. Many people every day look for opportunities that will give them money fast and within a very short time. Many people do not like going through the trouble of the slow and painful process to prosperity. They do not like putting in the effort to achieve whatever they want to achieve, to persevere, sacrifice, and to give themselves enough time before they can see the results they desire. Many people look for shortcuts. Many people will not understand you if you tell them that prosperity requires sacrifice, discipline, taking extra steps, and not doing the ordinary. Many people do not like shedding sweat. Many people are lazy. Many people want to start now and then achieve prosperity. If you want prosperity, you need to start small by small, little by little, just like the movement of the tortoise. Your business will get to where you want it to go. Whoever is saying you will get nowhere with your small business, which is fueled by collecting small resources from here and there, will ultimately understand you further down the road. There is no million that is not made of thousands. Before it became a million, it has been thousands several times. The smallness that rises from the financial ability that you have in the meantime is not an obstacle to the bigness of your dream. Start just like that. Your tomorrow is higher than today of your destructors. They will end up understanding you eventually. It will happen if only you believe it will happen. Luck has miracles, but it does not have promises. In 10 mistakes that a human being does in the pursuit of achieving their dreams, there is one mistake that keeps repeating itself. That mistake is the urge to swallow before chewing. That privilege is available only to a crocodile, which swallows its prey whole or in extremely big chunks. Those who said that life is a journey did not speak out of turn, nor did they say what is not the real truth. You have every type of passenger on your bus. Every passenger will alight when they get to their station, and they know where they are going. Ultimately, only you know what you are doing because you know yourself. Do not let anyone break your resolve, inspiration, and the urge to succeed and achieve your dreams. The habit of living in thoughts of others will make you live in their dreams every day. Finally, the end game will be nothing but child play. It is all nothing but vanity. A borrowed garment bears no pride for the borrower. They know it is not their garment, and they will be without it after the end of the reason for which they borrowed it. Do what you're doing. If it is brain wealth, it is your brain and it is your wealth. The physical hate of the father and the mother is the work of God. But to be prosperous and not to be is an individual's personal choice. The world is a horrible place where human beings must fight for their space. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I have some
You're
questions
welcome.
for you later, but we'll wait until the other speakers have spoken. And the next being Yirmiyahu Taub, who will be discussing the work of Fruma Halpern. Yirmiyahu is a poet, writer, and translator of Yiddish literature. He is the author of 2 books of fiction and 6 volumes of poetry, including A Mouse Among Tottering Skyscrapers, Selected Yiddish Poems, or Selected Yiddish Poems from 2017. Prior to Blessed Hands Stories, Taub translated Dine, an autobiographical novel, in 2022 by Ida Mays. So I give you the floor, Yirmiyahu.
Okay.
And
Thank
we
you.
have the screen share pretty clearly on Yirmiyahu, so I think it works.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Indran, for setting us up. Thank you to the speakers. Fascinating presentations. So as Keith mentioned, today I'll be speaking about Fruma Halpern, and I call her a Yiddish literary voice for the marginalized. Today I'll speak both about her writing, a little bit about her background, and time permitting, I'll read a tiny bit of my translation. So the book that I translated is called Gebenchte Hand, der Zählungen. I don't know if you can see it. It's this green surface. Blessed Hands Stories. It was published by Ikuf Verlag, which was a communist affiliated press in 1963. 39 stories. The foreword is by Isaac Elchanan Runch, who was a staunch advocate for her writing. A little bit more about him later. It includes a brief note by the author, a listing of supporters who helped bring about the book's publication. And it was Fruma Halpern's only book. So I would say the book overall is character driven. Their plot obviously is important. They are stories after all, but the stories shine for their psychological insights into characters living at the margins. What a friend of mine called the proud poor. And there's a whole series of stories about characters who are disabled or becoming disabled. Christopher, Seated Until the End, is about an African-American elevator operator who has to stand throughout his work life and then loses his mobility towards the end of his life. In the Stillness of the Night, a man is in the process of losing his hearing. The Mute Mother, one of the strongest stories in the collection, is about this mute first girl and then woman who's sort of taken care of by the courtyard. And this is presumably set in the old country, not America. And then she becomes pregnant, and a sort of series of harrowing events follow that. And Halpern takes us inside her mind inside those events. She can't communicate. She makes sounds. It's an incredible, incredible story. They Came to See Each Other is about two blind folks who fall in love. And Snowballs is about a young girl with some sort of paralysis of the legs who experiences the joy of playing in the snow. There are numerous stories set in or adjacent to hospitals. Here are some of them in the Garden of Eden, which is about someone who gets hit by a car, and it kind of traces his internal life as he kind of hovers between life and death. Clara Mary is about two young women, one Jewish, one non-Jewish, Puerto Rican. Both of them are hospitalized for essentially starving themselves to death. They live on a diet of cigarettes and coffee. And this is long before the term anorexia nervosa entered the public discourse, right? The book came out in 1963. They were written decades before. So presumably either Halpern saw this in her work as massage therapist, which I'll get into later. Um, there's also The Punishment, in which Halpern takes us into the mind of a racist and anti-Semitic nurse. And then in the hospital, a middle-aged daughter sits by her mother's bedside as her mother calls out for her firstborn, not the one who's sitting next to her. There are stories with African American protagonists, and Halpern made it a point to write about African Americans. Um, Neighbors, a Jewish woman and an African American woman form a deep bond in a changing neighborhood. And again, you can see that theme of cross-cultural friendship that we saw in Clara and Mary. We see that in Neighbors as well. We've already talked about Christopher. Three Apples Rolling, a housekeeper finds herself in jeopardy of losing her position for being late on just one day. And The Last Breakfast is really about lynching. We don't know that until the end, but that is what it's about. There are numerous stories about aging, very powerful ones. One of my favorites is Rusty, My Friend, in which the speaker speaks to a dog. And then there's an orphan synagogue where a young Orthodox rabbi is really trying to keep the synagogue going, even though its congregants are declining. And he befriends these two older folks, and that friendship takes some unusual turns. There are stories about the aftermath of the Holocaust. Um, I'll just mention one of them. In Bluma, the narrator memorializes a friend who perished in the Holocaust, and it's kind of like this. I would say it's a tone poem where the speaker is speaking in tones of lyricism, great intimacy, to the person who perished. So it's a very direct emotional experience. It feels very, I would say, unmediated. Of course, it is mediated, but it feels, like you're thrown into this bond, and you're seeing it, you're experiencing it. These are some of the stories that I think are worthy of consideration for the Jewish short story canon. Um, and yeah, we can't go into all of them. Let me just mention Hello Butch is about um, someone who had been a butcher in the old country and who tries, which was kind of lower down, very low down on the social ladder. And he tries to escape that in the new world and fails. And he remains a butcher. He desperately wants his son not to become a butcher, to become something more respectable, like a dentist or something else. And his son really loves being a butcher. So it's kind of a twist on the American immigration, Jewish immigration narrative. Whoops. A little bit about Halpern's writing. As I mentioned, filled with psychological insight into our characters' interior lives. Lots of backstory. We really get a sense of who the character is, fully realized. tremendous empathy for people living on the margins, struggling. They're not homeless, although one character does experience homelessness. But one wonders what Halpern might have made of, the epidemic of homelessness had she been writing today. Great poetic prose, often directly addressed to a protagonist. She was really connected to nature and the natural world, and so there are whole passages of observations of the natural world. And as befitting someone on the left, lots of sort of sardonic humor targeted at the wealthy and the powerful. This is Frumma and what we think was her husband. Well, the documents say husband, but some of her relatives weren't even sure they actually married. They probably, my sense is they probably did. Um, and I would say early 20th century. So prior to Frumma came in 1904, Isaac 1905. So this looks like a studio shot prior to immigration. I did track down the ship's manifest that she came on. Here's the dates, and a little bit of information about her, where she last lived. We know that she last lived in Bialystok before she came to New York. And another relative confirmed the whole Davis Goldberg situation. I did speak with relatives of her. I was really fortunate. I tracked down her grandsons, Victor and Robert, and Judith is Victor's wife. And so I interviewed them extensively, and they had a lot of really helpful information, which I never would have known if not for them. So hugely grateful to them. Here's Isaac's certificate of naturalization. And interestingly, we kind of know more about Isaac than Firma, which may not have been unusual. She is listed on his certificate of naturalization as Fanny Halpern, the dates of their daughters. And one thing I found it quite interesting, he did have to sign a document that said, I am not an anarchist nor a believer in the practice of polygamy. It is my intention in good faith to become a citizen of the US and to permanently reside thereof, so help me God. So according to the family lore, Frumma had been trained as a nurse in the old country, but she couldn't practice when she came to the US due to the training and possibly the language barrier. She transitioned into massage therapy and she worked at the Bronx Hospital, and hence possibly the setting of so many of the stories in hospitals, and nurses figure prominently. The whole question of healing is central to the book. Here's a little bit about the family tree. From an Isaac, they had two daughters, Nora and Vera. And again, the people that I interviewed were the children of Nora and Harry. Lynn, Victor and Robert, and Victor married Judith. So this just gives you a sense. I find when I'm working with writers' texts, it's really helpful to have family information. And for all of the Yiddish writers that I've translated so far, I've been able to get that. But it's always a race against time. It's a race against the clock as the generations age. And, family knowledge is lost or becomes inaccessible. So I feel grateful that I made it this time for whatever I know. Of course, there's so much I don't know, but what I do know is largely through the generosity of her descendants. There's some photos of the young Nora and Vera, and here they are much later in life. Here's Frumma with great-grandson Gregory, who's the son of Victor and Judith. A little bit about Halpern and her world. She was a member of a progressive literary club in the Bronx. This is from an article by I. Fisherman in the Morgen Freiheit. She was described as a gentle soul, generous, sensitive, and shy. When her club wanted to devote an evening to her writings, she objected, but the event took place. Her work was supported by the Morgen Freiheit, which was a communist-affiliated newspaper and also the Sammlungen, the kind of literary supplement to Morgan Freiheit. Her book was reviewed in the Morgan Freiheit, and the headline was Quiet Stories About Ordinary People. And here's a little bit about what the reviewer noted. So we've mentioned Runch, who was a champion from Halpern. He himself was quite prolific. He was also the president of the book committee that published the book. And Yiddish literature was often published by committees, right? There was no money in it. So you kind of had to raise money to kind of bring it out. And so there's a whole series of people that were involved. There was a vice president, there was a finance committee. Itche Goldberg was another champion. He was the editor of Yiddish Kultur. And here he is. In my afterword, I talk about an article where he mentions from Alburn. I was able to gather press and see how Firma Halpern's book was received in the press. It was mostly reviewed by leftist press, unsurprisingly. And here's some photos that a friend of mine took of her gravestone in the New Montefiore Cemetery. Here's a notice of a memorial meeting. And some of these scheduled speakers were people that appeared in the book's committee. So they were all part of that, leftist literary milieu. Bella Goldworth was herself a writer whose work was translated. So that's it for me. Do I have time to read like a paragraph or so?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop share. Okay, so I'm going to read the first two paragraphs from Blessed Hands, the book that I translated, just to give you a taste of what her writing was like. So this is the first story of the collection, and it's also the title story. Blessed Hands. Ever since Sarah stood up on her own 2 feet and became an independent person, her hands had been in constant contact with human bodies. Her fingers caressed their aches and nurturance, fusing with the pain that comes from hard labor. The hands received thanks and blessings from all sorts of mouths and in all sorts of languages. Sometimes they were blessed with tears and sometimes with a smile. Sarah didn't take pride in how her hands looked unless she was working with them. Outside of her work, she maintained they were nothing to flaunt. Her hands weren't feminine enough. Heavy muscles, taut veins, wrinkled skin, broad palms. In other words, hands without any charm whatsoever. But when the hands came into contact with the human body, they were animated with a life of their own. They appeared tender and soulful, with a maternal devotion, with the will to lighten aches and alleviate suffering, with a drive to care for children and elders. The hands extended not just to the ailing organs, but all the way to the human soul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
That was a beautiful screen share collection that you put together, Yirmiyahu.
Thank you.
Okay, well, our last speaker is Indran Amirthanayagam, and he will be discussing his translation of the Haitian Creole collection called Nan Po A. Indran is a poet, editor, publisher, translator, YouTube host, and diplomat. For 30 years, he worked for his adoptive country, the United States, on diplomatic assignments in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North and South America. Indran produced a world record in 2020, publishing 3 poetry collections written in 3 different languages. He writes in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. He has published 24 poetry books. He edits the Beltway Poetry Quarterly, which many of you have heard about. He writes a blog spot, and he writes a weekly poem for Haiti en Marche, and El Acento. He has received fellowships from the Foundation for the Contemporary Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, the U.S.-Mexico Fund for Culture, and the MacDowell Colony. He is the IFLAC World Poeta Mundial for 2022. Indran publishes poetry books with Sarah Cahill Marone at Beltway Editions. So with that, I hand it over to you, Indran.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you, everyone, for joining this meeting. You know, this book is of all the books that one reads and one writes are one's children, you know, but this one in particular is a special place for me. I spent 3 years living in Haiti in Port-au-Prince between 2014 and 2017. And then I returned to the island a couple of times in the interim, but I have not gone back in the last few years. And of course, everyone's trying to leave now, and there is a terrible, terrible crisis where there's no government and gangs are ruling the streets in Port-au-Prince and so on. But not the whole country, and there's always a morning after the night, you know. So people are resilient. The Haitians in particular are the most resilient people that I've met so far in my life. And so there's hope, despite the what one reads in the news. Anyway, there are a lot of Haitians now in the United States as a result of this trouble, this recent trouble, thanks to President Biden, who has been a great leader in terms of allowing opportunities to leave this state of crisis. Though, you know, this is, and yes, this is also a political statement, because for me, poetry is politics, and there are a lot of things I can say, other things about President, but one thing I do want to say is that we as also, not only our president, but our country has been involved in Haiti ever since Haiti achieved its independence from France. The revolution, the glorious revolution of 1804, when, and then the amazing trick on Haiti, the threat, and then the return of money from Haiti to France, which that debt which should never have been paid for the lands lost by the French in that revolution, saddled Haiti with enormous debt. And that's part of the reason why it has been in a state of permanent crisis ever since the mid-1800s. Anyway, I'm going into a long history because Haiti is very, you know, and I also remind people, in case you don't know, that the US Marines occupied, the United States occupied Haiti between 1914 1933. So it's quite recent history for the Haitians. So the history of foreign intervention in their local affairs continues to be a sore point and a complicated point. But all of this is happening, and then I write a love song to Haiti, which is this book, to the culture, to the people. I became a Haitian in a sense. I was called a Haitian by a friend of mine, Mackenzie Orcel, who is a great writer in French, actually, but also in Creole. He lives in France. But he used to start calling me Haitian or Haitian. And that sense of belonging meant a lot to me. And the belonging came from the language. So I'm sharing the screen. I'll stop. That's the cover of the book. It's a painting based on a painting by Frank Etienne, the great painter and poet and dramatist of Haiti. And I'll stop screen share, and we'll come back to, I think you can now see me. And I'll read a few of the poems and then answer questions or talk about the process of writing outside of English, in this case in Haitian Creole. Manage. I self-translated the book into English, so it exists in the two languages. Manage. I do not want to feel sad thinking of the last family member, last bird, Last time I can see a mountain covered with ice. But when you do not write, at least I can compose a poem and for a few minutes visit another world where I know how to manage rain and sun. Gérer. When Pavle sentim tris, when Pavle pensait à dernier mam famim, derniers oiseaux, dernière fois moué mon la glace, même les ou pas écrit au moins m'a composé bel poème, pour quelques minutes m'a visité l'autre bon, côté qu'à gérer, et puis contrôler la pluie avec soleil là. The month of August took on a lot of personal meaning for me because that was the month I had to leave my assignment. I had to leave the country. I ended up managing to stay on until September, but the August took on a sort of symbolic charge for me. I was in love. I was established. I didn't want to leave this newfound home. August has come without a breeze or lightning, without a protest in the streets. We waited for this August since finishing the manuscript, before my leaving for the other side, falling in love with another girl. August can arrive again for somebody else. August means nothing to readers not aware that August has arrived, then it will go. Bye-bye. See you later. Take my hat. I should probably put on my hat now. And the reason I put on the hat is there's a proverb in Haiti, paix sans chapeau, the country without a hat. And that's the other life, you see, that's the next stage. So I've been trying to keep my hat on ever since I learned to avoid going to the country without a hat. Moi doute. Now, doute, there's a player here. Daout in Creole is August. Août in French. Doute, the douter. So I'm playing on this sort of doubting, the month of August, mois d'août. Mois d'août est arrivé, son bris, son éclat, son méditation dans la rue. Nous t'étons mois d'août et puis fin écrit, manuscrit nous. En voix de pas moins l'autre beau, l'amour avec l'autre fille. Mois d'août pour arriver encore avec l'autre monde, mois d'août pas gain sens pour lecter, on connaît. Mois d'août est arrivé et puis l'ipral fini. Bye bye, mois d'août. Nawe pita, prends chapeau pito. So chapeau, chapeau in French, chapeau in Creole. So the two languages are closely related. And of course, Creole has many words from the African languages that the slaves arrived with. And it also has Spanish words from the other side of the island, the Dominican Republic. It also has English words. Kidnapping, for example, is the word for kidnapping in Creole. And I use a word enlèvement, which is a prettier word, I think. And there you have the differences between French, Francified Creole, and more African Creole. And there are differences between the Creole spoken in the north of Haiti and the Creole spoken in Port-au-Prince. Nous loi, nous wa. We are spirit, we are king. You cannot deny my identity. I am there even if I'm not there. I'm in your head, in the memory of the country. Even if you've never met me, I'm there because my Sri Lankan brothers served on the island as UN peacekeepers. You know, the whole world came to Haiti to save us from gangs. The island is very important, responsibility of foreign countries. We once produced profits far greater than the 13 British colonies in the United States. We have a history that makes us proud and a culture, dance, music, spirits in our own style. We're not like other islands. We're not broken down, broken up. We are Haiti. We're proud. We say hello with our head held up. Identity is the most important therapy, aid, tool to reply to the sea when it decides to rage against us, to drown everything. It cannot destroy this pride in our head. Haitian. Haïtien. Haïtien, comment nous y est? Ou écrit dans langue moine, et puis ou remène ak mono, ou défier des espoirs qui ont ma coûte plein proverbe, ou danser comme pas, ou chitabo la mer ak yon wom, et puis yon souris, dans zile oubli qui avance yon tigras, après mémoire gouffre, pour l'amour haïtien. Restez ici là avec nous. Haïtien, restez ici là avec nous. Haitian, Haitian, how are you? You write in our language and you love with our words. You defy despair with a backpack full of proverbs. You dance compas. You sit beside the sea with a rum and a smile in this forgotten island that advances just a little after remembering Gulf, pit to death. Haitian, stick around here with us. Haitian, stick around here with us. Some of these poems I had the privilege and joy of recording in a studio in Port-au-Prince in the last weeks of my stay there, 2017, along with Donald Z. Theodore, Titi Congo, Powell Tambu, young musicians who were my friends. And we recorded this album. It's called Rencontre Dut. Again, rencontre is rencontre in French. In Creole, spelled R-A-N-K-O-N-T, Dout, D-O-U-T. And you can hear that music, if you like, on the music platforms. And some of these poems are the words of the songs. And I think I'll finish with one of those. Actually, do I have time for two poems? I am not short poems.
Sure.
Okay.
We have a lot of time.
All right. Then I'll finish with two. This one's called The First Day. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, the hope that in the resistance and that I find everywhere and found everywhere in Haiti. And I was there in a relatively calm time, right? I could drive over to the Dominican Republic, for example. The first day, I want to spear my past, tell God that finally I have found enough courage to begin my life again. But spearing or burning are violent gestures. And I grew up with Gautama's philosophy, the example of Jesus. But it is true, he got angry with the merchants in the temple. We are people in the world. God became man. I feel this all the time, year after year. The great illusion of the first day. Premier jour. Même vle poignarder passé nous. Dit bon Dieu, finalement, m'te joigne assez courage pour commencer une nouvelle vie. Même poignarder ou bouler, c'est action violente. M'te grandi avec philosophe Gautama, exemple Jésus. When c'est vrai, il était fâché avec ma chaîne en temple. Nous c'est moun nan monon. Bon Dieu tourne l'homme. Mais c'est ça me senti tous les jours, l'année après l'année. Coalition, premier jour. And then I'll finish with this poem called Tanzabokate Fini. You know, the zaboka, the avocado in Haiti is a huge, huge fruit. And it's not the avocado you find in your corner store from Mexico and Peru. And I think in Florida, this big avocado is being grown now here and there. Anyway, so the avocado season is over. And if you listen to the music, this is perhaps the most successful of the songs because it's such a pretty song to hear. Tanzabokate fini, Tanzabokate fini, Fibel fin an villa ap marie ak moun lotbo, frem occupé ak manuscrit ton po partager l'idée nan livre de aller nan paye son chapeau, accepter réalité, pas vivre plus dans fantasy, ou gen quelques années, men seul toi nan créole, ou gen toute yon vie devant, penser, réfléchir, dit toute nouveau famille, félicitations, bonne chance, et puis écrit l'autre fois, souviens en Haïti, les avocates fleuris, souviens en Haïti, les avocates fleuris. The avocado season is over. The season of avocados is over. The most beautiful girl in town is about to marry a man across the water. My brother is busy with his manuscript. Time to share ideas in a book has gone to the country without a hat. Accept reality. Don't live anymore in fantasy. You're getting along in years, but only 3 in Creole. You have a great long life ahead. Think, reflect, tell all the new families congratulations, good luck, then write again about your life in Haiti when the avocado was in bloom. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to add something about the publishing process, Indran?
Sure. In terms of specifically with Creole, or yeah, I can. First of all, I learned Creole, a version of Creole in 6 weeks before I went to Haiti. Now, obviously, I didn't learn it enough, but I learned a basic Creole thanks to a professor here, whom some of you may know, Roberto Macion, who runs the restaurant Port-au-Prince in Silver Spring. And then I went to Haiti and I met Alex Laguerre. Alex Laguerre is a dear friend of mine, a brother to me, and he taught me Creole. He teaches French and Creole at the embassy to embassy staff. And I had the chance to study with him. And in the class, I suggested to him that we write poems to each other. And he liked the idea, so I wrote a poem in Creole and he corrected me. And then he wrote a reply. And that's how I really learned the language, by writing it and having it corrected and sort of in a dialogue with him. And that actually became a book called Poesia Catmen, Four-Handed Poetry. It was published just in Creole in the US, but the publisher, it's a very rare book, shall we put it that way. It exists, but it's, anyway, Poesia Catmen. And then we carried on. And so when I write outside of English, and I write in Creole, especially, and in the other languages I write in, I depend so much on the kindness of friends and readers and people who guide me along and correct me and fix me up. But then the publishing process is an interesting question, because you may think of Haiti as this country in crisis, but there are publishers in Haiti. There are many of services even today. Now, I kept writing in Creole, and I have a manuscript in Creole, which a local press in Haiti wanted to publish. They're in a city called Gonaïves, outside of the capital, where things are fairly quiet, but their printing press is in Port-au-Prince, so they're not being able to advance the book because of this current crisis. I mention this only because that there is a creative literary life in the island, parallel to the creative literary life of Haitians and Haitian-related writers abroad. I mean, many very fine Haitian writers you'll find now working in France, or in outside, or in the United States, or in other places, in Canada, especially in Montreal and other places. So it's a diaspora literature, but you also have a local literature. I mean, just even today, I got a message from a young writer who asking me to write a preface for his book of poems. Now, he's writing in French and in Creole, and he wants to also do an anthology of contemporary writing. So there may be bullets flying, but there are people wanting to persist with, and this is all very, very cheering. I don't know, it's somehow inspiring, that this. Now, the publishing process, so there are printers, there are publishers, there have been bookstores and cultural centers where people can present their books, and restaurants where an opening of a book can take place. But there's also self-publishing, and there are prizes sponsored by local companies and banks that award a writer a sum of money, a prize for a book of poems or a book of prose fiction. So these things exist and will come back once this government crisis is settled. And there are 100,000 solutions to this carbon crisis. As somebody was joking the other day, the only one worth listening to is the one who doesn't have a solution, because everybody is offering a solution to this crisis. Jacqueline Charles, who's a wonderful journalist, really excellent on Haiti, who writes for the Miami Herald, was making this comment on Twitter. Anyway, the point is, again, the marginal issue comes up. I mean, the l'outre-mer, I mean, writing and publishing in Haiti or in Martinique or in Guadeloupe or in Réunion or in Mauritius is not the same, does not have the same cachet as publishing in Paris. You know, I mean, just as in the United States, we have major houses and smaller presses and you know, so that it's not a level playing field, but people who want to get their work out do, and they use social media, especially Instagram and WhatsApp, to share their work. I mean, this is where the poetry of today is being, at least I'm talking about poetry, is being shared and read. I don't know how much it's being read, how many people are reading it, but that is where the new writers are turning, especially if they don't have actual physical publishing opportunities because of the crisis. Yeah. So,
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This is a good place for us to open it up to questions and discussion addressed to any of the speakers or from the speakers to each other. So go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question if you're ready. Go ahead, Katie. Are you unmuted?
I am now unmuted. Sorry. Just took me a second to find it. First of all, thank you to the presenters. Those are all really interesting. Such a diverse and unusual group of presenters. So thank you very much. I mean, I have questions for everybody, but I wanted to go all the way back, if we could, to Mojda and ask more about the translating the Persian women poets. And my question is, 106 women poets, that's brilliant to, you know, surface those for English language readers. My question is, all of these women have very different voices, as you pointed out. How do you approach translating so many different poems from so many different voices? Did you try and categorize them, or what was your strategy? And I'll mute myself again.
Thank you for that question. No, I didn't try to categorize them. I tried to capture their voice the best they had. Part of my wish was to be able to show the diversity of voices, to not just, and you know, they're very different in form too. Some of them are in the classical form, few of them, you know, because mostly women, most of today's poetry is a departure from what used to be classical poetry, with very, very structured rhymes and rhythms, and both, you know, even the musicality and the sonority is very structured in the classical Persian poetry. And most of them write in modern, whether it's, you know, free verse, whether it's prose poem, but there are also differences in form. So not only are there differences in voices, not only are there differences thematically, and sometimes even ideologically, but there is a wide variety of forms as well. And my point was to offer a sample, if you will, a smorgasbord of this is what is available, and hopefully pique people's interest to, if they want, learn a little bit about these women. But the only criteria I did have was this: as a translator, I have to, I don't consider myself enough of a professional translator to be able to translate any and all. I have to have a personal connection. There has to be something that I personally connect to before I can translate it. So some of the poems I translated because there are so many different ways of translating it. It's kind of like a puzzle. But for the most part, there was a hook for me, a very personal hook, either to the wordplay or to the structure or to the theme. And I need that, because I think absent that, I can't do the poet justice, and I can't do the poem justice. So and that might not be something that's true for everyone, but I certainly need that. And that was basically, my heart was my guide in selecting the poems.
Mhm.
Uh,
Indrian.
Yeah, may I ask a question, Moshe, just on the question of resistance and the 30% of the poets or the writers who are still living in Iran, and I'm just curious about how easily they can write, in other words, and publish, and are they living with in some sort of fear of a knock at the door or
So yes to all those questions, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that was very important to me is I wanted to make sure that I connected with as many of them as I possibly could, and to get permission from them. And as you know, Iran is not a signatory to the copyright to the copyright treaty. So you can actually publish things that have been published in Iran without any permission, without any, so there is no legal issue. But ethically, I wanted to make sure that they were aware that it was being translated, and that they were okay with it being translated for many reasons, right? Some of them, they thought this work was something of, it's a decade old. I don't want that. Let me give you some new poetry to translate, right? And I wanted everybody to have that chance. I was able to contact most, but not all, more than 90% of them I was able to contact and have a conversation with, and make sure that they were okay with it, right? Especially, as you mentioned, those that I wasn't sure if they would be okay with having their poetry translated into English. But given that on platforms like Lyric Line or, World Without Borders, you have the ability to translate world poetry, I think they're more open to it than they have been before. And sometimes they can't even, unfortunately, control what gets translated and disseminated.
Thank you.
Yes. I have a question to all of the presenters, sort of along the lines of the last question I asked Indran. What were the challenges and issues in publishing your works? And I suppose Moshe already answered that in part, but I wonder about Yirmiyahu and Jackson, if there are any challenges in publishing your works.
I am still at that entry level, so to speak, of looking for publishers, because I have a couple of, and I was going to reach out to you, Keith, probably because it is your contacts that I have to guide me on how I can get these small pieces of work published. They are, like I said at the beginning, they are more of prose and poetry because they are short articles that speak about different topics.
Right.
And I'm at that point now of looking what to do.
Right. Well, if I can help, I will.
Thank you. I'll truly appreciate that.
And what about you, Yirmiyahu? Was the process easy?
No, it was very difficult. In fact, it never gets easier. Like
Yeah.
the more I don't know, seems like the more I translate. First of all, the the audience for translation is small. And then the audience for Yiddish literature in translation is small. And then, it just gets smaller and smaller. A woman writer, leftist, communist, which is like almost still beyond the pale. And I've even had to debate within my mind about how much to say about the communist question, just because it's still so, people just shut down when they hear that word.
Mhm.
Even today, yeah, even today. Um, in fact, I think the president of ALA self-identified as a Marxist and a lesbian, and she got all this like hatred from the radical right about that. So I focused more on, why I think these stories are impactful, why they should be read. I focused on what they bring to a contemporary audience.
Mhm.
I think from Halpern's themes are universal. Who hasn't been to the hospital? Who hasn't experienced illness? Her focus on the body, um, as you can tell from the brief passage that I read, the sort of the
Right.
texture of the human form, the sort of the clay of it, of the human body, with all of its fragilities. Um, I mean, I think there's something rich, but dissonant that comes from encountering a work from an earlier time period. How do we grapple with it, with its different sensibilities, with its different questions, concerns, ways of looking at things? Um, and so I make my case for all of that. I think you just sort of have to when you're translating. Some publishers have said outright that we only publish contemporary work in translation.
Mm.
And so there are contemporary Yiddish writers, but I am drawn towards the older ones. So far, I've been drawn towards the older ones. So yeah, it's absolutely been a struggle. I did find a press, Frayed Edge Press in Philadelphia, that specializes in voices from the margins. And I was
Mhm.
like, who is more marginal than from Halpern? So it found a good home, I think. But it's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Publicity is hard. It's hard to get reviews, but I persevere. And yeah, I think yeah, Indra was saying about Haiti and Haitian writers, and that urge to get the work out, the urge to create, the urge to connect around literature is so powerful. And audiences do come. So,
Mhm.
that's my my hopeful message. But thanks for your question.
A further question about Halpern's work. Um, you mentioned several times that she was a communist,
Well,
and
I don't know. I don't know if she actually was. Her work was published in a communist affiliated newspaper, and then the
um,
book, the press, the publisher, was sort of communist affiliate, but I don't actually know, um, what her personal political beliefs were.
yeah,
I
maybe he was
Yeah,
just a fellow traveler, as they say.
could have been. There were
Um,
some pro-Soviet references in the books,
okay,
which they go by so quickly, you could almost miss them.
right.
But they're very veiled, very I don't want to say discreet, but yeah, they're understated, but they're there
Yeah,
briefly.
I was gonna say I sense in her work from your descriptions um that she's a very compassionate person, particularly about human frailty. And yet I didn't sense any drive for activism, social activism in the poetry itself.
Oh, you mean in the prose, in the stories?
I mean, in the
Uh,
not the poetry, in the prose stories. Yeah.
There are stories about activists. Um, and in fact, there's a beautiful story, Comrade Basha, about the political awakening of a young woman, um, which is deeply moving. She's kind of this young woman who's considered plain, doesn't come anywhere near society's standards of beauty. People look past her, men look
Mhm.
past her. But through a friend at work, um, she comes alive at this political lecture. So yeah, there are a number of political stories. They actually often have pretty dark endings. They're not triumphalist in any way.
Mhm.
She was interested in the question of activism. That might be something I could have further developed in my talk. There's one story that there's a crucial scene that takes place that was really, a political funeral after the Triangle, what appears to be the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
Ah, okay.
And so yeah, it's set but again, the narrator is an onlooker. The narrator is not in the march.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was a complicated relationship. I don't her grandchildren have not told me whether she was, at the demonstrations, whether but they did say that her commitment to the struggle for social justice was never wavered as far as they knew.
Right.
And that she cared deeply about suffering in the world. But whether she got involved in like the nitty-gritty of coalition building and, activism, I just don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Other questions? Other points to be made?
I have
Nancy?
a question for
Oh,
Jack.
go ahead, Indran.
Just very briefly, my very little knowledge of Kenya, but I know of East Africa, but when I was 17, I met Wole Soyinka, and Wole Soyinka told the group that I was with my father, and anyway, that he was talking about Swahili, Kiswahili, as a unifying language of the whole continent. This was in the late 70s. And I'm just wondering whether that movement or the dream of of one language, one African language that all African peoples speak is a live political issue, it exists, if it's an idea that has had its day. Just curious.
Yeah, it is a very alive, and thanks so much for that question. It's a very alive movement. In fact, there is a body, administrative, political, and all that, which is the African Unity. They have adopted that the General Assembly of the African Unity will be conducted in Kiswahili so that there can be some form of unity in language. And like Kiswahili is actually the intended lingua franca of the African continent. And that movement is very, very vibrant and strong as we speak. And I think there is a July 7th or some day that is what was adopted by the United Nations as a Kiswahili Day.
Mm-hmm.
And on that day, there is a lot of movement in the United Nations, in fact, presentations and all that in Kiswahili.
Okay, good. Good to
I
hear.
hope I've answered your question.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm happy to hear that.
Okay.
I have a question for Moshe, which was kind of talked about earlier. So are there literary journals that are not under censorship by the government in Iran? Are there like feminist periodicals that women can publish their poetry in and feminist
There,
presses?
there is, but from what I've heard, and this is only secondhand, is one never knows what's going to get omitted, what's going to get censored. There is no guidelines. So something that may be published, may have been published a year ago, may not be published now. The way I found these women poets was largely the first step was through social media, because that's where they post and that's how they can get most of the poetry out. Many of them are published outside of Iran, many of them in the US, many of them in European countries. And that's how most of these works or collections of poetry get noticed or get published.
But a lot of them were published in Iran, right? I mean, or a good
Some of them,
some.
but I wouldn't say a lot. Yeah,
Okay. Just
maybe
some.
about one fourth to
Okay.
1/3 of them were published in Iran. Some of them are no longer residing in Iran or themselves outside of Iran as well. But there are some that are in Iran, and as I mentioned, it's not easy to know what gets published or what the price is. Many people are many of the poets or writers have been subject to penalties and imprisoned, and it's the censorship is not trivial, to say the least. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yirmiyahu, you mentioned that the work was published by a committee, and I was a bit unclear about how that works.
Yeah. Yeah. So this basically there was a group of advocates for Firma Halpern, friends, advocates, etc., who believed in her work, who came together and decided that these stories had to be, quote, rescued from the realm of the newspapers and put together in book form. And without them, without that work, would we even know of her name? Her name, she would be buried in these newspapers.
Right.
And so, yeah, the book committee, the chairperson was Brunch, the vice chair was Shmuel Dykesel, the secretary was Baruch Miller, the finance committee was Bella Goldworth and Lily Miller. Then there's active members, and then there's individuals, long list of individuals that they came together. So, I mean, yes, Ikuf put it out, but it was through the financial help of this committee. Sometimes there was no publisher even at all in Yiddish literature. It was just this committee that was devoted to getting the works of writers out. So it's very much a literature of the people. Kind of the people felt that Yiddish literature needs to get out. I'm not an expert in kind of like the social history of Yiddish publishing, but if you look at like a lot of Yiddish books, you'll see a book committee, or often it says book committee. And that's people coming together to bring out a book.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question for Indra. So is print on demand at all an option for Haiti? Where you don't, or is it just not even, you don't actually need the physical press. It's more.
You need to unmute, Indran.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it would be an option for Haitians writing outside of Haiti, but Haitians in Haiti would need to have the books mailed to them. I mean, if they do print on demand, how they can't rely on the mailing system, even when during quieter times there existed a postal system, but it was in very poor repair, state of repair, and it's just not really an option.
Not an option.
Not at the moment. Not for writers in Haiti. Obviously, writers outside of Haiti could look at that and publish on Amazon or some other company that does prints on demand. A lot of small presses. I mean, we're a small press, Beltway Editions. I think are using print on demand, but we don't actually at Beltway Editions. We believe that we should take the risk with a print run and then hope to recover the costs, through sales. But that said, it's very tempting to go to print on demand because
Print on demand has saved so many
yeah,
small presses
right,
who
right.
otherwise would have folded long ago.
We haven't gone there yet, but anyway, it's certainly something that we are thinking of. Yeah.
Mojda, you have a question?
I did. This was a question, or maybe more of a comment for Yahoo. It was amazing. I did not know the author of whom you spoke. Um, but what is interesting to me is how she, as you so eloquently put it, became the voice of the marginalized, then the focus on whether it was intercultural connection or differently abled or disabled characters was amazing to me. And uh, was she part of an intercultural family? Was this a firsthand experience that she has had, or this is just a compassionate individual writing about and making sure that the marginal have a voice?
Wow, that's a great question. There's, so much of what I know, or so much of what there's so little that I actually know. So that the result is much of it has to be conjecture. So I'm assuming that a lot of the hospital stories set in hospitals are based on her own experiences. Certainly, the story about the racist and anti-Semitic nurse, I think felt like something born of experience that she might have seen. But maybe not. She doesn't say. The few words from the author at the back of the book are so brief. Um, and so I don't even know like where she was born. And with other writers, they usually give a little more. And there's also the lexicon, the Yiddish lexicon. She came out after the first Yiddish lexicon. This book came out after that was published, so she wouldn't have been in that. But there was a shorter one that came out in the 80s, and there's like half a sentence. Um, Maybe it was because of her self abnegation or self denial, modesty. But this is the writer of this is my fourth translation project, and this is the writer I know the least about. Two of the previous three left huge caches of documentation behind. Um, and then the third left not huge, but a nice size, manageable cache. But from a Halpern, she just left behind so little. Um, I think what is clear is that I think she lived a difficult life. Um, and I think, due to her political or sort of situation, her way of seeing the world, and also, yeah, through her compassion as a writer, all those things I think were in play. It's hard to untangle, where one started and the other began, but um, I think there are also a lot of surprises in her book. There are a lot of ways that she doesn't quite fit in with, the proletarian literature
Mhm.
of the day. Um, like I said, there's a lot of non-triumphalist endings to the stories. There's a lot of um, disturbing kind of twists and turns. There are a ton of very unidealized characters um, who make some questionable choices, moral choices. She doesn't say this in a judgmental tone, but it's there. Um, So yeah, I think all of that comes into play. I wish I knew more. I wish she had left behind like an autobiographical essay. Um, I think
Yeah,
that
I
would have
look
been really
forward
helpful.
to I look forward to reading the book, but in what you described of it, it seems very palpable as far as the body and its ailments and what one does with that
Yeah.
in life is a central theme. So I look forward to reading the book.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. It's body is the site of pain, but also joy. And I would say just overall, like people struggling, but finding and maintaining dignity in that struggle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would just like to add one thing before we run out of time regarding publishing, because we've been talking about publishing and financing. If you think about it, and you think about aid, foreign aid and so on, let's say to Haiti, what if that aid included aid to publishers to publish Haitian books, or books written in Creole or in French and that? I mean, what if we rethink what aid means in terms of developmental assistance and all of these things? Because I worked in Haiti and I remember helping to bring the Martha Graham Dance Company to Haiti to perform right after the earthquake of 2016. There was another earthquake. 2010 was the major one, but 2016 there was also a major one that hit the southern part of the country. And everyone's thinking about tents and rebuilding houses, but why not also think about celebrating the dance cultures of Haiti by offering some of our best dancers, almost who was well known. So I'm just thinking in that. So this might seem is another question, but it's the way we rethink about, which literature gets published. It's just a question you have to think about. We have to think about, and who pays for that literature, and why does this literature get published and not that literature, or not enough of that literature? So this is a big question. It not only applies to Haiti, but it applies to every country and every language, and forgotten languages, dying languages, and not dying languages. Why are they not dying? Because they're supported economically, politically. So it's a huge question, but I just wanted to throw it out there just in relation to the discussion about how do Haitian, let's say, writers get their work out. I know Nancy has a question, so I'll stop there. I just wanted to raise that.
Thank you for raising that question. Yeah. Nancy, you were going to ask a question.
Yeah, this was great to hear all four voices looking at some themes related amongst what seems like a very diverse group of voices, but there are some general themes that do run through. My question is, can each of you share with us something that you're working on for a future project?
Sure. I'm working on a collection of a selection of poems by one of the 104 poets currently.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm also working on the same kind of thing, like collection of short stories. I don't do fiction at all. So I like, probably even the last presentation I had here was that kind of inspiration. And those are the kind of things I write. In fact, I only participate on Facebook for social media. Those are the kind of things I put out there, so that it's just my passion doing that. And that's why I requested probably Keith and anyone else on this platform today that can actually hold my hand into publishing those short stories or short pieces of work for guidance. I'll truly appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's to answer the question about future projects.
And what about you, Yirmiyahu?
So I'm working on translation of a Yiddish folk singer named Lifsha Schechter-Wiedmann. She was the matriarch of a Yiddishist dynasty. She lived in the Bukovina region, which is kind of moved hands, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of Romania, part of Ukraine, not far from Chernivtsi. She had a photographic memory. She knew like countless songs, not just in Yiddish, but also in Ukrainian, Polish, Russian, German. And her life story is truly unbelievable. She immigrated to America and then she went back to Europe and experienced two world wars, had a frontline view to two world wars. So it's an incredible story.
And in my case, I've been working on the translation of the Mexican poet Kenya Cano, painter as well, her book, An Animal for the Eyes, and then the translation of the Swiss poet Francois de Bleu, which they're both mostly, one is mostly finished, but a long way from finding a publisher. And then I'm also working on, I've committed to translating a few different projects, but I have not really got going on them. But anyway, those are the two most complete ones at the moment, yeah. And then I'm writing my own poems and editing and publishing with Beltway Editions, various books. We just came out with 2 new books at Beltway Editions, and invite you to look at beltwayeditions.com if you have time to see what we've published and what we're publishing. Thanks.
Thank you for all sharing your plans. And I had a motive in mind with just letting Moshe know that there is this Women in Translation series that Indran has read in, where authors read along with their translators. That's sometimes an issue, to be able to get the authors to be able to be on screen with the translators. But that's going to happen this August, and there'll be a call for that in May, and the call will be May 13th to May 31st, I believe. So we get a lot of people who send the work, but that may be something to consider. And then if I guess Yirmiyahu, your people from Yiddish are not living, so
Right.
that's
Yeah.
You
call their spirits, conjure their ghosts.
Yes, and then in some ways, because it is geared around women, non-binary, queer, it has a special focus as well. But I send that out, and I see, yeah, I see in the chat we have stuff going. So thank you for letting me ask that question.
Sure.
I have a question about that process, Nancy Naomi, if I may interrupt. It's
Yes.
not on topic of everyone else's work, but these are all live, these conversations with the women authors and their translators, right? Live and recorded like we're doing now.
So they are live like this, and we have one event at 8 in the evening, because that can accommodate some places in Asia that can't readily do a 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Sorry for interrupting, but I'm going to stop the recording now, shall we?
Oh.
So we don't have we can continue, but I just want to stop the recording. Does that make sense? So that it's a unified.
Sure.
Okay, all right, thanks. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just didn't know whether we wanted all of the chat about this particular issue on the recording, that's all.